Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and vast green fields, there lived a humble farmer named Thomas. Thomas was an ordinary man with extraordinary perseverance. For years, he had worked the same patch of farmland his father and grandfather had tended before him. The soil was good, but not rich enough to make Thomas wealthy. He lived a simple life, waking at dawn to tend his crops and caring for a small herd of sheep. Though he worked hard, money was always tight, and the dream of a better life seemed distant. One late summer afternoon, after a particularly bountiful harvest, Thomas decided to plow a little farther into the western field, where the earth was hard and rocky. The villagers had long told tales of strange stones buried beneath that part of the land, but no one had dared to dig too deeply there, fearing they might disturb something unlucky or worthless. Thomas's plow struck something hard and metallic. Curious, he stopped and began to dig by hand. As he brushed away the dirt, the edge of an old, rusted chest appeared. His heart pounded with excitement and a bit of fear. Could this be treasure? With effort, Thomas pried open the heavy lid, revealing a trove of gold coins, jeweled necklaces, and ancient artifacts. The chest shimmered in the sunlight like a dream come true. Thomas was overwhelmed. He remembered stories his grandmother told about a long-lost noble family who had fled the village centuries ago, rumored to have hidden their riches before disappearing forever. Could this be their treasure? The gold and jewels were more valuable than anything Thomas had ever seen. Word spread quickly through the village about Thomas's discovery. Instead of hoarding his fortune, Thomas decided to use the treasure to transform not only his life but the entire community. He invested in better farming equipment, expanded his land, and hired workers, creating jobs for many villagers. With his newfound wealth, Thomas built a school for the village children and improved the local marketplace. Years passed, and Thomas's farm became one of the most prosperous in the region. The simple farmer who had once struggled to make ends meet was now a wealthy and respected man. But he never forgot his roots or the hard work that had brought him this far. Thomas remained humble and generous, always ready to lend a helping hand. The treasure had changed his fortune, but it was Thomas's kindness, wisdom, and determination that truly made him rich. And so, the story of the farmer who found treasure in the farmland became a legend, a reminder that sometimes fortune favors the brave and the hard-working, and that true wealth lies not just in gold, but in the heart. Years passed since Thomas had discovered the ancient treasure buried deep in his western field. The once humble farmer had transformed not only his own life, but the entire village. The people respected him, some even revered him. He built homes, schools, and granaries. But as his wealth grew, so did something else, an emptiness, quiet and creeping, that riches couldn't fill. With the major village improvements complete, Thomas found himself with more time than ever before. He no longer woke with the rooster's crow. The early mornings gave way to late nights, the quiet fieldwork replaced by grand feasts, wine, and indulgence. Slowly but surely, the farmer who once toiled in the soil with calloused hands began to slip into a life he once couldn't even imagine. It started innocently. A short trip to the nearby city, just to see how the rich lived. He bought fine clothes, silk shirts, embroidered coats, and leather boots that cost more than his old cottage ever had. People greeted him not as a farmer, but as Lord Thomas. He liked the sound of it. Then came the parties. The city was alive with music, laughter, and beautiful women. Thomas found himself at the center of it all. Dancers clung to his arms, their perfume clouding his judgment, and nobles invited him to their halls out of curiosity for the rich peasant who struck gold. He drank rare wines and spirits, gambling at tables with men who had never worked a day in their lives. What began as occasional visits turned into months-long stays. The farmhouse back home sat empty, and the villagers began to whisper. In time, Thomas purchased a grand estate in the city, a marble villa with servants, fountains, and sprawling gardens. He surrounded himself with women who admired his wealth, if not the man himself. He gave lavish gifts, gold rings, pearl necklaces, exotic pet. He mistook their affection for love, unaware that their loyalty ended the moment his coin ran out. The treasure chest that once brimmed with promise began to thin. But Thomas didn't notice. Or rather, he refused to notice. He sold lands to pay for his lifestyle, dismissing it as investments. His farmland, once the pride of the village, grew wild with weeds. Loyal workers who had helped him build his empire were laid off or abandoned. Some left the village entirely. The school he built closed when funds dried up. Still, Thomas partied. One night, while hosting a banquet in his villa, he stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below like stars fallen to earth. A young woman beside him clutched his arm and whispered sweet nothings, but her eyes kept drifting toward the diamond brooch on his chest. For a brief moment, Thomas saw through it all. The smiles bought with gold, the laughter that stopped when his back was turned. He felt a pang in his heart. Not of love, but of something deeper, regret. It wasn't long after that night when the debts caught up to him. Creditors came knocking. The villa was seized. The horses, the art, the silk, all gone. The women disappeared. The so-called friends turned away. Thomas was left with little more than the clothes on his back and the memory of who he used to be. He returned to the village, hoping to find solace. But time had passed. The fields were overgrown. The schoolhouse was in ruins. The people looked at him not with respect, but with sorrow or disdain. The man who had once lifted them had abandoned them. And now he was back, poor again but no longer humble. One old friend, a blacksmith named Jared, offered him a place to sleep in his barn. "You've lost your way, Thomas," Jared said one night as they sat by the fire. "Not because you had money, but because you let it own you." Those words stuck with him. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Thomas began to work again. He cleared his old fields by hand, one section at a time. The soil, though neglected, still held life. The villagers watched with wary eyes, unsure if he had truly changed. But Thomas no longer sought their approval. He worked not to impress, but to heal. He sold the last few trinkets of his former life, a golden goblet, a sapphire ring, to buy seeds and a plow. It was not enough to restore his empire, but it was enough to begin again. The treasure had made him rich, but losing it taught him something deeper, that a man's true worth isn't measured in gold, but in how he lives when the gold is gone. And so, the once wealthy farmer, who had soared and fallen, found a quiet redemption in the same soil that had raised him. Not as a lord, but as a man, wiser, weathered, and finally, free. Years had passed since Thomas returned to the village, broke and disgraced, but with something stronger than before, resolve. The man who once fell prey to his fortune now lived with a quiet purpose. Each morning, he rose with the sun, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The earth, long abandoned, began to recognize him again. The fields, once overtaken by weeds and thistles, softened under his hands, yielding to plows, seeds, and care. The villagers, at first, kept their distance. They had loved him once, then watched him vanish into a life of luxury, forgetting the very soil that made him. But as seasons changed, so did their hearts. They saw the man in the field, alone, working without complaint, repairing fences, mending roofs, and offering food to those who had even less than him. One harsh winter, an early frost destroyed nearly all the crops in the region. Hunger crept in like fog, thick and slow. Thomas, having anticipated the cold, had stored his harvest, not much, but enough to share. When he opened his barn to feed families in need, something changed. Old resentment gave way to forgiveness. The blacksmith's daughter, Anna, who once studied in the school Thomas built, returned from the city to teach the village children again. This time under Thomas's roof, in a room he cleared out for lessons. The village began to revive, not because of gold, but because of community. The well he had once financed was repaired, this time by volunteers who remembered how life had been before his fall. They began calling him Farmer Thomas again, Not Lord Thomas, not the treasure man, but the farmer. He smiled at that,